What's going on in the South Pole? Time to check in with Stephen Quayle to talk about UFOs and some other mysteries. Stephen, I trust you and your family are well?
Yes, thank you, George. And what a pleasure to be with you and talk about there's a whole lot of shaking going on in Antarctica. And also the flip side of that is Antarctica is going to be, I would say, the most revolutionary and revealing area on the planet this coming year. I'm obviously tracking everyone's attempt at leaking or the leaks that are being given on UFOs, all of the strange anomalies going on both geologically and astronomically, and it all seems to be pretty much coalescing in Antarctica. Now, I think people have to understand Antarctica is a huge continent. It's the size of North America and Mexico combined. But beneath it is where the action is, both under the ice and geologically. And tonight we're going to talk about some of the things that have been kind of hidden in history that fortunately there are people who are starting to come forth with a lot of intelligence and information. For instance, one of the most amazing things is Admiral Byrd's diary, which has been subject to scorn and ridicule and everything else. But people forget that Richard Byrd was one of the most famous explorers in history, given the Congressional Medal of Honor, and that the first Secretary of Defense was murdered, thrown out of Bethesda, James Forrestal, a hospital, third floor of the hospital, when he wanted to come forth and tell America and the American people what was really going on. 1947, Operation Highjump. I'm just giving a little brief thing.
Sure.
But we actually went to war, and we're at war with the Nazis in the Antarctic until basically there was a secret agreement signed. When you're dealing with the Antarctic and you're dealing with all of the legends and the myths and the histories and the anomaly and the mysteries, histories and mysteries, it's fascinating because even the most famous map, the Piri-Reis map of the Turkish explorers, shows Antarctica ice-free in the early 1500s.
What is it about Antarctica that captured your attention, Steve?
My attention was captured because of all of the people that I've talked to that have investigated the pyramids there, the most powerful transmitter on Earth that seems to be affecting the weather. It's basically the most powerful transmitter, but I don't believe it's of earthly origin either. I believe that, just as throughout the universe there is a conflict going on, I think the conflict, if you will, the secret history of the world is pretty much being written and being directed from Antarctica. For instance, the Nazis, when they were looking for a place to go to build their, if you will, their equivalent of Ultima Thule or the great frozen land to the north, when they ended up both in the South Pole and North Pole, later towards the end of the world in the South Pole, the Antarctic, with the legends and the myths and also all of the covered up and covered over in history. My favorite motto is the true history of the world is covered over and covered up. So, for instance, when Richard Byrd went and literally was tractor beamed in through an opening in the North Pole, could have been a big cave. There was arguments, did he get to the North Pole? Was it another opening in? But the whole, if you will, the hollow Earth theory is kind of a misdirected, or not a misdirected, but a mistermed use of a word. But here's the deal. One of the things I've been seeking is to show people that there is when I say this, supernatural, the aliens, for instance, the aliens, and then in antiquity, the fallen angels. And it's interesting that in the fallen angel realm, you are always seeing some of the oldest carvings in the world, whether it's in Babylon or whether it's in Samaria. All of these things always show up, the giant beings with wings, okay? And the wings are kind of the giveaway. Throughout the world, there is a power structure and a power grid of pyramids. There's pyramids in China. There's pyramids in the Great Lakes.
Oh, all over the planet.
All over the planet. But what's most interesting, and this is really, I think, fascinating, is that and this is something that's going to blow everybody's mind, when Byrd was just looking over to be a polar explorer, he was tractor beamed into a place where he met the king of the world, the master of the world. Now, that may sound crazy until you find out that literally, and again, Lucifer has a kingdom. People don't understand that there used to be a planet called Rahab, and this is how it ties into Antarctica. Rahab, or Astra, is where the asteroid belt is. It was in between Mars and Jupiter. And the fascinating events of even the last couple of days, there are scientists from Harvard saying that some of the asteroids are intelligently directed. Well, some of the ones that they're coming to grips with that are extrasolar, coming from out of our solar system, are literally coming into the actual orbital point of which the planet Astra, or Rahab is another name for it, was exploded. It's the exploded planet of Lucifer. And it's interesting because some of the Bible verses are talking about this, and even the Greeks recorded it in the fact that they would talk about the time that Mars would come close to the Earth. They didn't call it Mars. They had other names for it, as most of the ancients did. But the bottom line is, George, now we see all of these revelations coming about Mars. We're told it never had water. Now it's got water. We're told the moon didn't have water. The moon's now got water. And, Buzz Aldrin's probably one of the most amazing men. A couple of years ago, he was in the Antarctic. And what was interesting is there were stories he got sick and everything. And I reached out to some people that have knowledge of what really went on down there. Now, first of all, my opinion is Buzz Aldrin's not only an American hero, but he's telling the truth. I did Alex Jones today, and Alex was talking about his encounter with Buzz Aldrin, and I want to share with your listeners, this is stuff that nobody knows, or actually, forgive me, a lot of people know in the intelligence community, but it's been kept quiet because it's important that people understand that even the term Cairo, and I'm jumping around to show the pyramids in Egypt. Cairo meant city of Mars, or actually encampment of Mars. But the bottom line is that when he landed in Antarctica, he was supposedly, I'm told, taken to a place which contains pyramids, like the ones that we're talking about in Egypt.
Well, he took pictures of them, didn't he?
Yep, he took pictures of them. And then he said he was suddenly unable to breathe when the moment, as he was taking pictures, he was in no physical stress at all. But here's where it gets interesting, okay? He said, I saw pyramids made of a shiny metal-like surface which felt so evil that he could not come closer to the objects to fully investigate them.
Huh.
And then he said, and as I think carefully about what I saw, I felt a danger to the whole world from the object, the entities who made the objects. Keep that term entities in mind. Now, here's what's mind-blowing. Also, I saw some things which I felt that I had seen on the way to the moon, but I did not comment about some of the larger cigar-shaped objects, precisely what I had seen in space, but these objects were sitting behind the pyramids as if the evil did not want me to see them. I knew at that point I had entered a place of true evil and danger for the whole world. Now, he was debriefed, and he was told that he was not to share the information with anyone or he would promptly be killed. Well, the bottom line is most people don't understand that there is a disclosure going on that I don't think any man can stop any longer because of the preponderance of evidence. So what is important is the intelligence agencies were there debriefing him. And how this relates to Admiral Byrd, George, is when Admiral Byrd was debriefed, he was told to never speak of it again, and he was talking about literally meeting the king of the world, and the OSS, which was the forerunner of the CIA, whenever you see anything related to, if you will, a supernatural intelligence existing, controlling the affairs on Earth, these guys are all in cahoots. And when I say these guys, I'm not talking just about humans. Admiral Byrd was told, specifically that he was taken to Antarctica. He was tractor beamed, in other words.
And he seems to be more scared about things in the South Pole than the North Pole, and that was an amazing story, too.
It is an amazing story, but to my knowledge, what I just said, basically, here's the message that that the king of the world, Lucifer, and that's what he was told his name was. I was told that the U.S. I'm quoting. I was told that the USA government was to follow all his instructions, and the entities would come to the USA government at the correct times and inform the president or others precisely what would be required of them. Do you remember when all the world leaders were seemingly drawn to the Antarctic?
Yep, exactly. Secretary of State John Kerry went there too. I want to get back to Admiral Byrd for a moment. He goes to the North Pole and he sees some incredible things. When does he go to the South Pole?
Well, he goes to the South Pole in 1947, okay? And obviously, for people unaware of, the diary, he said he was flying over vast fields of ice when all of a sudden he started seeing tropical forests. And the temperature in his cockpit, which warmed up dramatically. In other words, there was an area that changed radically from something that was the frozen wasteland to an over lush, almost like a primal forest or a primal jungle environment. Even said he claimed he saw with his binoculars living woolly mammoths. Okay, this was in 1947. So when he did have the encounter with everything in how do I say this, that his diary was based around, it was in the year 1947, which was actually after, the Operation Highjump. So I think, George, what was interesting, too, is that everything that he encountered was classified. It was classified as everything is, and I want to make this statement. There are some things that need to be classified, but I'm believing that we're going to see basically the roof blown off of the classification of all the ancient history and all the mysteries. Now, getting back to who Admiral Byrd met, he said point blank, he met Lord Lucifer, the king of the world, okay? The Bible calls, that when Jesus and Satan got into it over who was the ruler of the world, well, because of mankind's fall, if you will, rebellion against God, the devil gained control. And look, the devil, Satan, Lucifer means light bringer. And I think that one of the things that's interesting, and it's really important, is that there are so many records that are hidden that are now being brought forth. For instance, the very term Lucifer, we're now dealing with some of the genetically altered, proteins and catalysts, and one of them is called luciferase. We're dealing with the binocular telescope of Mount Graham that's run by the Catholic Church. It's called the Lucifer telescope. We're dealing with the amazing, if you will, signatures of something that's otherworldly. And now why is this important? Because we're hearing all this news about a new world order, global government, global monetary system, global religion. The Pope is pushing it. And what's interesting is that a man named Spangler stated, a UN religious expert years ago, that the New World Order would only be entered into by those who took an allegiance or pledged their allegiance to Lucifer. And it was called the Luciferic initiation.
Now, did Byrd, though, endorse this Lucifer down there?
He didn't endorse it. He basically carried the message that Lucifer had given to him, to the U.S. government. He was told to shut up, never speak of it again, and you just don't hear from one of the most famous, both bipolar, meaning he not circumnavigate, but he, you know what I'm saying? That pun intended. But the bottom line is they pretty much locked him up and locked him away. When the first Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal, was appointed under the Truman administration, that's when Forrestal started talking to people. He wanted to bring forth all this information, and that's when he got thrown out. He was murdered. He got thrown out the third floor window of Bethesda. But before, listen, how does this sound? Like an episode of The X-Files? They did everything they could do to keep the guy drugged up. I'm talking about the first Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal, with massive amounts of drugs, claiming he was hallucinating and everything. And, you know, I really believe so much of our, quote, history is the basis for a lot of the writings of Hollywood that is a, if you will, almost a foreshadowing of things that are going to be coming on the horizon. For instance, in 1953, this is really critical. This has everything to do with what Byrd saw and everything to do with what is the whole, if you will, the alien presence and the alien cover-up that's going to be revealed. Wernher von Braun, everybody knows him, was the first head of NASA. He was also a very brilliant, probably the most brilliant rocket scientist in the history of the world up until that time.
That's right, and was part of the Nazi regime.
And he was a member of the SS. He came to the United States along with Hermann Oberth and others under Operation Paperclip. But what most people don't understand is in 1953, actually he wrote it earlier, but it got published in English in 1953, he basically wrote the book, The Mars Project. And here's where it gets interesting. And here's how I'm going to tie it all together, believe it or not. The Mars Project was about the colonization of Mars. And it was about the way Mars would be administered by the body of scientists who would be some of the most brilliant men on Earth. It would not have any relationship to how any government on Earth was run. It would be basically a scientific utopia. And what was interesting, the name that he chose for that body of the Martian rule, if you will, was called the Elon, the E-L-O-N. You see, Elon Musk, obviously, I don't know how his parents chose that name, but it's very fascinating that the ruling body of Mars would be called the Elon, or Elon. So the thing that is tying this all together is simply this. You know, one of the things that's really, you get a lot of heat. We had a conference, one of our True Legends conference a couple of years ago on UFOs and the alien question, answering the alien question. And I was told by people who were there, who were favorable in the intelligence community, that there was a whole lot of talk going on when I was talking about the Mars bases, manned Mars bases, manned moon bases, and all of the advanced technology. And people said, well, that's just crazy stuff. I personally, George, know 5 people, 6 even, I don't know Mr. Aldrin, but he's even made statements to that. See, the problem is that there's 2 space programs, a secret space program, and then you have the, you know, obviously the Saturn program, etc. But Dr. Wernher von Braun was a friend of my friend, and basically they talked about stuff faster than light speed, and supposedly, and then even Dave Hodges has a friend who's a friend of his ex-secretary, and she verified that Dr. Wernher von Braun had been taken to other places, even Altair 4. Now, just to put that into perspective, you guys, this is the most respected and the most amazing scientist. But Dr. von Braun and Hermann Oberth made a statement. It wasn't that they were smarter than the scientists in the West, but that they had help from the spirit world. And most people don't understand that the German advance, whether it was the Hannibal, the flying saucers, even the first Stargate that Germany found to power it up. I had a 4-star general tell me, Steve, go watch Hellboy, the opening scene, and by the way, in special operations, not retired, and he said, that's exactly what the Nazis were playing with. Now, the whole theme of Hellboy, that's not what I'm talking about. But what I'm trying to get people to understand is this, that the pyramids, that all of these earth changes that are taking place, we're seeing triple quakes happening, stacking quakes, meaning the USGS and others...
Oh, there have been like 50,000 quakes down there, haven't there, lately?
Yeah, 50,000 quakes in 3 months. There is a magma pool under Antarctica, George, that is 10 times the size of the one that's under Yellowstone.
Well,
okay?
Yellowstone erupts every, 600,000 years?
Yeah, 652 or something, but give or take, 6,000 years. But again, the thing that is as active, and by the way, not only is the temperature rising, in the Antarctic, but the power surges that are coming. You can go on the MIMIC program, which shows you the amount of precipitation in the atmosphere, but there are astonishing amounts of power. Some guy said, a scientist friend of mine said, Steve, it's more than 150 times all the power that the whole civilized world can generate. And he calls it FA power, fallen angel power. And again, this is something that people have got to understand, and it's critical. Not everybody wants to believe in God. Not everybody wants to, believe that there is a spiritual conflict going on, but I do, and I believe that we're seeing it right now playing out, because one world government, one world religion, and one world economic system is in the making. And it would be interesting. I think I sent you the list of the treaties that have been given to me by those in the world who understand these. In other words, pretty much deep state people, and I'm talking the secret government, that, for instance, the Egyptian records indicate that there was an actual treaty between the Egyptians of 3000 BC and the sky gods. And the Indian, the continent of India, they had one 400 BC. So all of these agreements, and then you get into our contemporary times, and what I would call post Roswell. Before Roswell, the Nazis had an agreement, and these agreements were signed between the heads of the government and the aliens, the famous Eisenhower meetings, etc. But what most people are not understanding is this, that the realm of I would say, revelation and the release of this information, it's going to cause men's hearts to fail. Jesus said men's hearts are going to fail them for looking after those things coming upon the earth. And so when you're talking about what some people say, oh, that's just superstition, when the things of men's nightmares start to materialize on earth, it's a whole different world than just, oh, that's just science fiction. The tie-in between the intelligence agencies and Hollywood is a given. It's a fact. I mean, even Gene Roddenberry, the author and writer of Star Trek, the thing is
they were all given inside information, weren't they?
They were all given, and by the way, all of their stuff had to be checked, but that was the way the intelligence agencies could offset the real discoveries. Oh yeah, I saw that. That's just a sci-fi movie. And it's interesting because, again, now we're seeing that the release of the information from the famous Navy fighter photos, we're seeing all of the strange stuff that's coming out, the lights beneath the water. And for the record, both the Nazis and the Japanese had submarines that were doubling as aircraft carriers. These things were huge, okay? And the Japanese had it even more developed, and since the Nazis made a secret deal, and I maintain, and my book is called Empire Beneath the Ice, and people go, I didn't know this. That's the thing that I guess I'm trying to overcome. When you know what's going on in the history of a thing, you can obviously understand that there seems to be a cohesive attempt to subjugate humanity and to get rid of a whole lot of us humans. And as a human, I'm not really happy with a post-human future, because we're seeing it in every area. And by the way, AI, the very first alien implant movie was Invaders from Mars. They had an alien implant from Mars going into a person's back of their neck. So alien implant, artificial intelligence. I maintain that the basis of artificial intelligence is based on alien implants, the coordinated integration between an organic and inorganic substance. And we remember all the cattle mutilations, we remember all the strange stuff going on, and it's accelerated the amount of manipulation of the human genome, and it's getting to the point, George, where somebody and something wants to totally annihilate the humanity and everything, in my opinion, that was obviously created with such divine and amazing God genius level stuff, and it's the extinction of the human race and the insertion of what Nietzsche called the Übermann, what Übermensch, what Hitler wanted, the supermen, breeding a race of creatures that basically doesn't have any of the restraints of humans. Basically, live forever, be strong forever, and be able to do everything you want to do forever. And that's what Zoltan Istvan, one of the most famous transhumanists, said. He said, basically, all transhumanists don't want to die. They want to live forever. So whether you're dealing with Ray Kurzweil and singularity, and I'm not just trying to be a name dropper, what I'm saying, it all gets back to this. There is a massive amount of revelation coming, and the revelation that's going to come on ancient history, the hidden, if you will, legendary and mythological places of renown, the Golden Age, that's all spoken about, whether it's covered by the desert sands, the horrific winds will expose them, whether it's covered by ice. And here's something most people don't know, that with the volcanoes that they've found, 93, which brings the total under Antarctica, I think, to 132, that if the ice were to melt over Antarctica, the entire, miles of ice thick, it would raise the ocean up to 230 feet.
Jeez. Now, you've always said it's not what's on top of the ice that you're interested in, it's what's underneath.
Absolutely. It's the same story. It's never what you see. Remember, ancient civilizations always seem to build in an area or upon a previously area that was built up. A good example of that is the Giza Plateau in Egypt. The Giza Plateau, what's above ground we see the Sphinx, we see the three great pyramids, and now they're just releasing some more finds of the Saqqara, the Step Pyramid in Egypt. But unknown to most people is the real antiquity, what I would call the pre-flood, before the flood of Noah. That whole civilization is built beneath the plains of Giza, and they're finding this stuff. And so, the whole basis of our True Legends film series was there's truth in legends. And what's fascinating is the Special Operations Forces. This was explained to me by these guys. They go out and they're looking for ancient weapons, ancient, if you will, technological developments, communication devices, and the big P word, power. And I don't mean like, political power. They're looking for power sources, and they're looking for substances that they know exist in theory, but they have not yet localized or found them. So it's a treasure hunt for ancient history, and that treasures, when they start being released, are going to paint a whole different picture than classic history. Classic history is a joke, in my opinion.
Is there an underground city there?
Yes, and it should be cities, C-I-T-I-E-S. I mean, we're talking a place that, imagine all of North America and Mexico, and imagine that there are, if you will, almost like, different areas, different kingdoms. And I was contacted by a special operations guy from another country, won't tell the country, and he gave me his entire experience in one of the cities, and you're going to love it, of the giants beneath the ice. I don't know if people have been noticing it, but the mainstream media across the world is all of a sudden pulling Hitler out of the bunker in Berlin that he never died in. Now, what's astonishing to me is that we've all heard of the Hollow Earth theory. We've heard of Admiral Byrd, Operation Highjump. We've heard of all those different, if you will, almost rumors from the close of World War II. But as I started to really investigate First Secretary of Defense Forrestal's, quote, suicide, actually murder, Admiral Byrd's talking to the press after Operation Highjump, which took place in 1947. The whole premise of this book is that the United States did not win World War II. They had if you will, a showcase and a show cause with the Nuremberg trials, etc. But when we squared off against the Nazis in the South Atlantic with basically 15 ships, 2 aircraft carriers, and 3 of the most famous admirals in the Navy up until that time, this wasn't a coal expedition as mainstream newspapers tried to portray it. What was fascinating to me is 2 years before the Germans, quote, officially surrendered, the biggest multinationalists, both financiers and technology-related companies and drug-related companies in Germany started moving their assets to different places in the world, primarily South America and into the Antarctic. Now, what's interesting, I don't think most people have ever really paid attention to this. I'm going to quote just a real quick historian.
Sure.
James Robert, WW2 historian and writer, interviewed a British wartime SAF officer, and he said in the summer of 1944, British scientists and commandos had found an ancient tunnel. Under orders, the 30-strong force went through the tunnel, but only 2 returned before the Antarctic winter set in. And what was interesting is the 30-man team was relegated to 2. And what was the most fascinating thing is they talked about Nazis under the ice, polar men, and an under the ice city. Now, that's been a common denominator for so many years, and behind all of the intelligence that's gathered, you cannot separate the interrelationship between the financiers, the financial parties of both the United States and Germany, and the different nations of the world, and the cover-up of ancient German technology. So the German technology was interesting because in the 1947 Operation Highjump, there was a literal battle using flying saucers, and even the Russians have a documentary and an interview with the generals that explain what went on. So this stuff got declassified from the Soviet archives when, the breakdown of the Soviet Union, and the KGB opened up a bunch of their information to the public. So what we have now is we have the real reports of Admiral Byrd talking about the spaceships that could fly from pole to pole almost instantaneously. Now, first people will dismiss this and say, oh, this is crazy. What's going on there? But the Antarctic became more fascinating when a lot of the events that have been associated with aliens, UFOs, and all the different phenomena seem to kind of aggregate there. Most people believe that only 50 of the U-boats were unaccounted for. Interesting, when you and I did a show a number of years ago, I believe one of it was a great-grandson of Admiral Donitz, who was the Reichsfuhrer after Hitler supposedly died. He was the German U-boat commander for all of the U-boats, the submarine forces, and his great-grandson called me after you and I were on and saying, you're the only one that has ever spoken about what my grandfather said, or maybe great-grandfather, that the world wasn't ready for what's coming down. Now, it's my contention that with all the Hitler, even series on TV, I don't know if you've watched
them. Yeah, I think it was the Discovery Channel, was it?
Yes, sir. And why all of a sudden? Well, here's what's going to happen, in my opinion, and we'll give the bottom line and then go back and build it. The idea that the advanced weaponry that Germany possessed, the advanced genetic alteration and experimentation that went on, and I put up for your listeners today on my website the whole story of Dr. Mengele in Brazil, which they made a movie of, the boys from Brazil. And the point is that in one little town in the middle of nowhere in Brazil, what was found were some of the greatest amount of twins. I don't know if you remember that story, but it's fascinating that Mengele escaped. No one ever found him. He is believed to have died in the 70s, but the point being is as you start to track down each and every one of these anomalies, they all lead back to the fact that Hitler did not die in the bunker, that the genetic engineering experiments of the Nazis and the Third Reich were so far advanced that their advanced weapon systems that they absolutely introduced into the world scene, so much of that became classified after World War II that the United States even had an operation signed off by the president that it was called Operation Paperclip. And under Paperclip, famous guys like Dr. Werner von Braun were brought into the United States and given new identities, and they were divorced from any of their, quote, Nazi affiliations. And it was Walt Disney, I think in 1954, that promoted Dr. Werner von Braun as literally one of the smartest men in the world. So there has been a cover-up that has been ongoing for all these years, and it all goes back to the Germans spent an intense amount of money, expedition, and literally to the four corners of the earth looking for ancient artifacts and relics. They even had a group called the Ahnenerbe, and the Ahnenerbe meant ancestral heritage. It was Hitler's belief and the Third Reich's belief that they were the Aryan race, that they were somehow the noble Nordic warriors, and that it was their duty to reinstitute the Uberman, you and I've talked about that, or the Supermen, or the race that controlled the planet and would control the world. Now, people don't understand that megalomaniacs with money can get whatever they want accomplished. So in Empire Beneath the Ice, How the Nazis Won World War II, I lay it out, and with enough footnotes. I was telling somebody that the footnotes are extensive, and even the zero-point energy, like Nick Cook and others who have been dismissed. I mean, some of these guys are fabulous, fabulous investigators and researchers, and when you add it all up, the Nazis absolutely tapped in to the multidimensional Stargate realm and were given so many advanced weapons. It's my contention, the bottom line, that the Nazis absolutely, through their banking interests and through their conglomerates, still rule the world and are going to bring about the Antichrist, and it's going to be the most astonishing thing because they're going to use the technology they've developed that the world's kept hidden and that they possess and that our government possesses and that the Russians possess. Now, why is this important? Well, we're at World War III.
Jerry Corsi, in his book, Hunting Hitler, by the way, Stephen, is convinced Hitler fled to South America. They built him a mansion. He shaved his mustache, and that's where he lived and died.
Absolutely. And I don't differ. I take a different approach to this, is that New Schwabenland was the name of pretty much the northern part of Antarctica. You know, the Germans staked out 230,000 kilometers. Most people don't understand this, that the first real claim of territorial expansion was when Germany sent their fleet down there to pretty much flag it, tag it, bag it, and claim it's ours. But in the story I told about the SAS finding the tunnels, interestingly enough, in October of this year, the Arctic anomaly warning a circular opening has formed in the middle of the Antarctic ice pack. That was the 20th of October, 2015. Now, all of the polar explorers, all of them said as they got to a certain point, it got warmer, and they noticed that there were areas that couldn't be, defined by supposedly the ice. And what's fascinating is the fact that obviously people say, do you believe Admiral Byrd's diary? And maybe we can get to that whenever you want. But Admiral Byrd's diary maintains that his plane was taken into one of the polar openings. And what is astonishing is it's not just his story. There's multiple stories and multiple witnesses confirming, both on the Antarctic and in the Arctic, North and South Pole, respectively, an opening. And it shows up. So this is on my website. I posted it. Arctic anomaly warning a circular opening. And what's fascinating is that when Jerry Corsi wrote his book, I don't know if you asked him this on the air, but was he, at that point, the news about Hitler still wasn't coming public with all the...
No, Jerry was one of the first to really pop that before everybody got on the bandwagon, Steve.
Right. And so the thing that was fascinating to me is just all of the different interplay, George, between all the different factions in this whole thing. And what's interesting to me is that, and I think it will be to everybody else, is that we get the obvious impression from history that it played out one way. I think it was Churchill that said history is always written by the victor. That doesn't mean history is always accurate. Everybody wants to embellish their conquests, and that's why the Egyptian pharaohs built so many monuments. The same thing with Rome, said, look at all the wonderful stuff we did. But when you dig beneath it, you find out maybe all of it wasn't as wonderful as it was portrayed. In the world we now live in, it's called braggers' rights. To the victors go the spoil. And unfortunately, the other thing that gets spoiled by the victors is the truth. So in the book, Empire Beneath the Ice, How the Nazis Won World War II, I lay it out, but one of the things that I've tried to combine is the fascination with the occult that the Nazis had. Now, after the Nuremberg trials, that was actually brought up at the trials, and everybody kind of snickered and laughed. But it would be interesting to people, I think, to find out that the investigation of some of Hitler's leading men, even the SS, we've been told it means one thing, but it literally means Schwarzsonne, my German's not that great, but it means black sun. So the Order of the Black Sun, Heinrich Himmler, and all of the people that were in the SS were very deeply involved in the occult and believed that they could make contact with other world entities. And in making contact with other world entities, were given dictations. One of the most famous ones was with a guy by the name of Johann Eckert, or Dietrich Eckert. That was Eckhart, his middle name, Dietrich. The point being is that they absolutely, I guess you would say, conjured up spirits, and then they took the time to literally ask them all the questions. So once again, what most people don't realize is the Third Reich, gods, beasts, and Nazis, you cannot get away from the supernatural. You usually ask me on the show, and we can just hit it right now, when you're dealing with biblical prophecy, when you're dealing with the beast, the Antichrist, the false prophet, you come up with still a time period where the push is towards a one-world government, the push is towards a one-world religion, and the push is through a one-world currency. Well, we've got the Pope echoing that. We've got John Kerry saying, you know, all this world's chaos is to bring about a new world order. That's the whole motto of the global elitists, you know, order ab chaos, or order out of chaos. So when you hear him and you hear George Bush Sr. making that statement 230-some times when he was president, you begin to think these guys are ready to implement.
Oh, of course. They're desperate. Stephen, and let's talk a little bit about what you touched on, and that is the massive coverage we're getting about Hitler staging his death and taking off. I was convinced years ago, when we heard accounts that he burned his body and his girlfriend's body, his fiancée, that they were hiding something. I mean, it was obvious, wasn't it?
Absolutely, and what's known in a matter of historic record, which I document extensively, is that both of them had duplicates. You know, even modern, I mean, I'm not saying they were clones, but they had lookalikes. And that was in order because, if you remember, the assassination attempts against Hitler, he was very, 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 at that point on, and even prior to that, worried that that would be the case.
Oh, my God. He was paranoid.
I think he bordered on more of a paranoid, yeah, but he was also psychotic. And with that, he basically became so enamored with the idea of making, if you will, a bunch of little Hitlers, that he made sure that there were duplicates and even triplicates of them. Now, I'm not talking about true identical clones, but which brings me to the next point. If Mengele was able to do all the things that he had done, and by the way, a lot of the reason why so much is unknown about both Hitler and Mengele is to cover up that the United States pretty much, how should we say, vacuum cleaned up all of their known resources, meaning in research, and integrated it into our own defense community. It was no, how do I say this? It was not by accident. Even people that were full-blown Nazis were given new identities, and the famous Dr. Ishii of Unit 731, which was the Japanese equivalent of Mengele, was brought into the United States and given a new identity, and they lived peacefully in the United States under a guise of basically, what would you say? They were given a whole new persona, and they never had to atone or account for their misdeeds. Now, again, it becomes hard for people to understand every day, George, the acceleration of biology, of all of the attenuating things that they're going to do with gene editing. Obviously, what we're seeing now is the time when, talking about this stuff 10 years ago, I mean, my email, Now I think more people are going, because when you're dealing with singularity, when you're dealing with human enhancement, when you're dealing with cloning humans, when you're dealing with all these things where it was future tense, now it's present, and it's present headlines. Well, I submit to you that obviously somebody has Hitler's real DNA. I submit to you that it would be a fascinating twist on even the standard dispensational Bible prophecy that if Hitler claimed he was going to rule and reign 1,000 years, maybe instead of just the ravings of a madman, he knew more about the cloning that would be done. And most people used to look at cloning as just scientific clowning around. But now, I'm telling you, it is astonishing to me. There is no shortage of stories of human genetic enhancement, which brings us back to Admiral Byrd going into the hollow earth.
Mm-hmm.
There are people that claim Byrd's diaries are fake, but here you have a Navy admiral that absolutely, after his briefing from 1947, he disappears for 8 years. They literally put him out to pasture or kept him away from being able to talk to people. And that's that whole time when the Men in Black came out, the UFOs, remember, from Roswell on. And I've long maintained that from all my writings and research that the whole flying saucer phenomenon is more of an extra-dimensional, not an extraterrestrial, though they can, obviously, once they enter into our dimension. So getting back to the Nazi Stargates, it was fascinating that through the Ahnenerbe, which was a group of the SS that went throughout the world looking for religious relics, i.e. the Spear of Longinus, they were looking for the chalice, they were looking for the Ark of the Covenant, but they were also looking, interestingly enough, for giants. And I just had to throw that in. Even Mengele would sit on the ramp at the different camps that they would bring the people to be destroyed into, and he would specifically want anyone who had any genetic difference, but he spelled out, interestingly, he spelled out giants and dwarfs. Now, what that's critical for is because when Byrd's diary is gone over by, on hour by hour, almost minute by minute, the race that the king of the world, and that's what he's called, is called the Ariana. And they were looking for the Aryan. The Nazis thought that there were two opposing factions. There was Shambhala, obviously Three Dog Night fame, and then there was Agatha. And so they saw these two, if you will, old, multi tens of thousands of year old civilizations at war. And they decided they wanted to side with the Ariana. So the point being is when the Admiral Byrd is taken, his aircraft is like kind of taken in with a tractor beam, and it lands, and he's taken to meet, quote, the king of the world. What's fascinating is everything has German names. You probably have seen that. They refer
That's right.
to the Fugelstedt, the flying saucers. Here's something that the Stargate phenomena is becoming more prevalent every day. You saw that the new gamma scanning of the King's Chamber and what may be Queen Nefertiti's tomb in the Great Pyramid of Giza. What was interesting to me about that is the timing of all this. So what I look at, I look for the coalescing, or like a hub, all the different spokes coming into the center. And now Hitler, let's just say this, if someone were to say that the Fuhrer is alive, and remember this, that the Wall Street financiers absolutely were tied in with the German financiers and the bankers. Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution by Anthony Sutton laid that out easily. But if
there was a Bush, Preston, was it Prescott Bush?
Yep.
Who supported Hitler?
Absolutely. Now, I would say this. It's fascinating that if you look at what people don't understand, and this is where it gets relevant too, is the Muslims sided with Hitler during World War II, especially in North Africa, where the Desert Fox, Rommel, was stationed. But it's not that he was it, but the whole timing of all of these Hitlerian revelations now
are astonishing to me. What would happen, I'm throwing this out, what would happen if we saw Hitler and we were told that he's been cloned, okay, or he was basically an alien / supernatural reproduction of the man he used to be? Maybe he doesn't look like Hitler, but maybe the people in the know, bring him out at the right time. And let's say the advanced technology of the UFOs that the Nazis have had now, obviously in 1947, that's given them 68, almost 70 years. And what happens if from their under the ice base and other underground bases around the world, they pretty much are pulling the strings? There's an unseen hand that pretty much controls everything on the planet.